At this point, most people have heard the mantra, breast is best, or the newer version, breast is normal. Studies suggest breastfeeding can boost our baby's immunity, raise their IQ, and prevent childhood obesity and cancer. Not to mention that it's a beautiful, natural way for mothers and babies to create an everlasting bond. For most expectant moms, the message comes through loud and clear. Breastfeeding is the most important thing a mother can do for her child. My name is Suzanne. Some people might know me from my blog, The Fearless Formula Feeder. But I wasn't always so fearless when it came to issues of breastfeeding and formula feeding. Before my son was born, I desperately wanted to breastfeed. I watched many of my friends do it, and it seemed so natural, instinctual, and empowering. Unfortunately, I faced challenge after challenge. Latching issues, postpartum depression, and my son's severe milk protein allergy, and ultimately switched to formula feeding. I felt like a massive failure, both as a parent and as a woman. But as I began to blog and write about these issues, connecting with other women who'd had similar experiences in the process, I found I wasn't alone in feeling this way. I started collecting stories about feeding babies on my blog, but I wanted to put faces and voices to the heartbreaking, inspiring words of the women I encountered. So I set out to make a video. I spoke with women in the greater Los Angeles area, some breastfeeders, some formula feeders, and others who fell somewhere in the middle. And through this process, one thing became abundantly clear. When it comes to breastfeeding and formula feeding, things are never as black and white as they're made out to be.
The day that he was born, I went to work like normal. We went out for dinner, and about halfway through the meal, I kind of had some indigestion, and figured I just ordered the wrong food. I stopped eating, and I ended up going to bed soon after. And I woke up a couple of hours later. My stomach was really upset when I went to bed. I woke up a couple of hours later in quite a bit of pain. So she called the doctor in the middle of the night, and he said, well, I'll meet you at the hospital.
The OB came in about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I saw him, and the look on his face wasn't a man who had just been woken up out of bed, and that's why he was upset. He was upset for something else. And then he came on in, and he said, we're going to have to deliver the baby. I have no choice.
I didn't plan on breastfeeding. I thought that, I didn't really think about it, but I was raised in a household where we were all formula fed. My mom has epilepsy, so she was told she didn't have a choice. So that's what I thought of, bringing babies into the world, that, you make the bottle, you shake it up and then, feed the baby. And I didn't think of breastfeeding.
So at what point did that change?
When I was pregnant with my first child, and I started reading the birth book, and I thought, well, it's convenient. There's, a reason why we are able to nurture, literally our children. So, it's free if you could. And the research that, the babies were more intelligent, or that children grew up to be more intelligent. So of course that's what I read, and I was 25 at the time, so I, wanted to be different from my own mom, and so I was just like, okay, well, this sounds, I don't see the negativity in this at all, so I'm gonna do it, And of course there was a lot of leche, so that really advocated breastfeeding, so I just was all on board, and kind of got a little militant, actually,
I was at high risk for a premature delivery, and he told me that I needed to make sure that I was going to make it to 36 weeks. And actually, exactly 1 week from that appointment with him is when I was going to see my OB again. Well, literally the day before my appointment and my last day of work, my water broke, a complete and full rupture. There was just no going back from there. It wasn't like a small leak. I was 33 at 33 weeks. I just labored, and I was able to have a vaginal birth and everything. And of course, because she was 33 weeks, they usually expect him to be, have breathing problems and stuff. So she was taken to the NICU basically right away. She was in the hospital for 29 days, about 4 weeks. So she had a lot of trouble feeding and eating. She basically had to be taught how to eat. She also was diagnosed with reflux. With her reflux, she couldn't lay down to eat. She couldn't lay flat, because that is when her food would come back up, and it will cause her to stop breathing. And right as I'm feeding her, she would stop breathing. And so she had to be held up like this to make sure, so then it wouldn't come up as easy. And because of that, they didn't want to try breastfeeding at first because she didn't know how to suck, swallow, breathe yet, and they wanted to make sure that before they put her to my breast anyway, they wanted to make sure that she was able to do that stuff. So I would say maybe 4 or 5 days later is when they tried. And of course she would scream and she would instantly, I called it destat or braiding. It was almost instant. I've had her turn completely blue where the nurse had to snatch her from my arms to, because she wasn't, they call it self-revolving, she wasn't coming back out of it by herself. So they had to take her from me and use the oxygen mask on her to get her to start breathing again, so.
I had a full-blown eclamptic seizure in the triage room and passed out.
Yeah, I mean, they thought he was going to be, Henry would be 3.5, 4 pounds. And they never even got a chance to measure how big he was. And she seized. And
They had me on the operating table.
Called and whisked her out and put her in the operating table and brought him out.
It was 7 minutes from the seizure to, and they got him out.
And the doctor came in and told me he was 2 pounds, 2.5 ounces. So he was half the size they thought he was going to be.
He was on a gavage tube, and the first couple of days they feed them something called TPN, total something nutrition. It's not even formula. There was a very nice nurse that came in probably between 12 and 24 hours after he was born, and she hooked up a breast pump, handed me the other end and said, okay, go for it, go do it. There was some literature there, but I wasn't really mentally present enough to read. And she had explained it to me, but again, I mean, I was so fuzzy.
They had explained that it was because your body wasn't ready to actually produce milk at this point in time, that you were going to have to pump, and it was going to be frustrating because not a lot was going to come on out, and but you had to do this to stimulate to be able to start to produce milk. There was a lot of this discussion that took place.
And actually,
I'm fairly certain that I understood most of it, but she didn't because she was still so out of it. I don't
and
know
in the very beginning, I was on so many medications that they said that the baby couldn't have the medication. It couldn't have the milk at first anyway.
But it was important
so I was
for her to
pumping
do
throw
it.
Away.
Yeah, it was important for her to do it to stimulate the production.
I didn't have the presence of mind to argue anyway. I do think it was probably the right thing to do. But it took several days before I managed to get anything anyways. So he was probably, maybe 5 days old before he got any breast milk.
In the hospital, how was your experience there? Did you get any help with getting her to latch, with breastfeeding in general?
I did, and it was, it was all very quick, but yeah, they come in and, they help you, bring your nipple to the mouth and try to move their little chin to get them to latch on, and it worked for a second, but not the way I envisioned. I envisioned well, it's just so natural. Why isn't this working right now? I was a new mom. That's such a, when you leave, you're leaving this team, that you feel secure, and then now it's just you and your baby. And so, yeah, just like that was really what was running through my mind, that I was going to be alone, and how can I do this? How can I make her, breastfeed? And how can I make this work, And after my maternity leave was up, I went back to work, and I didn't have that luxury of going to another room to express the milk. And I was working at a coffee shop. I was working at Starbucks, and towards the end of my shift, I'd be my top would be soaked because I didn't have that time, and so I would get home, and by the time I got home, it was a good half hour before I got home, and I'd go immediately to express the milk, and I would sit for hours and only get maybe an ounce. And I think it's because I wasn't doing it regularly enough, so so that was disappointing. It was frustrating, actually, and frustration and nursing don't go hand in hand. I only worked 3 days a week, so most of the time I would just, I wouldn't have to worry about okay, do I have enough for her? And so yeah, I ended up supplementing. I nursed her until she was about 10 months old.
Do you think that the fact that you were able to use some formula supplementation allowed you to keep up that breastfeeding relationship longer than you possibly would have been able to without?
It definitely helped, absolutely, because it's a peace of mind. And I think that's key. That's key for any realm of parenting, you know, the peace of mind. A happy parent and happier child, you know. So it definitely helped, and yeah, I was thankful for it.
I pumped as long as I could. I pumped for 8 weeks. And part of the reason that I had the seizure, part of the reason why I had HELLP syndrome and everything came up when I was 7 months pregnant is I was diagnosed after with something called Sjogren's syndrome. It's got a lot of strange symptoms to it, but one of the symptoms is that I don't produce a lot of saliva or tears or breast milk. I was producing less than 20% of what he was consuming. And because he was so small, he wasn't consuming very much. My production was going down, his needs were going up. I was crying every day and I was trying to pump. It's not easy, it's not comfortable. And at 8 weeks, I needed to be mentally present for my child. So I stopped pumping at that point. I felt like it wasn't, with producing less than 20% of what he was consuming.
It was becoming counterproductive to the process.
It was.
It was becoming counterproductive to the process of raising him.
So honestly, I was very freaked out. I didn't want her to suddenly have an aversion by me trying to force her to breastfeed and be back in the hospital again. The last thing I wanted was for her to be in the hospital again. So it was pretty stressful, and I didn't push it. She didn't want to, and I was like, okay, I'm good. I will pump. I will exclusively pump, and I will feed her breast milk out of a bottle. But a lot of what we didn't realize is that she had rashes from the time she was born. Bleeding rashes, horrible rashes. She'd come home, horrible, horrible rashes. She just started screaming, constantly screaming. She would just, you know, you would see her tense up and cry and then relax. And this was all day long with these horrible rashes. Well, then I started noticing a lot more that she had blood all in her diaper when she would poop. Laced with blood, all these mucousy pockets and stuff. And so I started telling her that, and we started watching that, and it would get worse and worse. And then it kind of dawned on them that she could have a milk and soy protein allergy. And once I saw the gastroenterologist, he said, yeah. He's like, you need to try, they both told me to stop. I had already stopped eating dairy while I was breastfeeding. So I didn't eat that at all because the NICU told me not to. I had this huge list of foods that I could not eat. Dairy was one of them. Even soy was on there, which I don't.
Reflux or?
Because they're young and their tummies are undeveloped and they weren't sure what they would be able to handle yet. So I mean, I had like cauliflower was on there. I mean, you would be amazed at all these foods that I did not think that I needed to not eat, but I had a huge list. So I wasn't eating dairy, nothing like that. I already wasn't eating it. And they said, okay, you know, still pump, stop giving her the breast milk and give her the hypoallergenic formula, which is lactose-free, soy-free, milk-free. I mean, it's just everything free. Once she started doing that, brand new baby. Within a week, brand new baby. I just could not believe the huge difference that I had. I had a completely different baby. So I decided to stop pumping. There wasn't really any use for it if she was allergic to the milk proteins that are in my milk as well, because I had cut dairy out. So I stopped.
When you're that small, every ounce counts. You know, it's not like he's 8 or 9 pounds and you can say, well, you know, if he doesn't get something this meal, it's okay. You know, they let him out of the hospital when he was 4 pounds. They put kids in the hospital at 4 pounds. You know, every ounce counted, and, you know, whether it was formula or breast milk or whatever, he had to get it into him, however possible.
I took a breastfeeding class when I was about 30 weeks pregnant, and they scared the crap out of me. And so then it wasn't just like, yeah, I'm gonna breastfeed because that's what you do. It was more like, oh my God, I have to breastfeed or my baby's gonna die and be dumb, and lots of other things.